Oh hell internet! This video is pre-written and it's going to lay out a case which is going to be extremely unpopular to a large number of people. Ironically, perhaps the people to who I am most directly speaking as I write it. If you are one of those people, please be assured, I don't know I'm right. I don't claim to know I'm right. I have no reason to think I'm a better person than you for any reason whatsoever. And so please don't take any of that on board as you watch. I think I will try and make that clear repeatedly, but I wanted to state it clearly at the outset. Nonetheless, I do feel compelled to make this video, and so here we go. I once met a young man, I happened to be one myself at the time, who declared rather smugly that he knew how to decide whether an action was ethical or not. An action was ethical, he said, if you would be happy to tell your mother about it. This, as intuitive as it is a very poor definition of what is ethical. Parents don't know everything, they never have, but this is now perhaps more true than ever before. But perhaps then I have to say that because although I consider this essay to be completely ethical, a part of me nonetheless hopes my mother never sees it, for reasons which will become obvious. I call this an apologetic because although I will profess a passionate opinion, I don't know if I'm right. How can I? How can you? No one can disprove the existence of God, obviously. Some try to suggest that this fact itself entails God's existence. The ontological, cosmological, and teleological arguments all make some appeal to this kind of idea. These arguments try to make a spiritual, a Gnostic conclusion from a concrete and agnostic set of premises. But the God they try to describe is, by definition, beyond expression, so no linguistic argument can possibly be valid, period. And yet, we can't visualize 5- and 6-dimensional objects either, but we know the maths works. Maybe it's the same with God. Sadly though, theological hermeneutics does not form the basis of our technology and does not even form the basis of our morality as much as some people might like to protest otherwise. Just look at the discussions in the early church on the nature of Christ. It was all thrashed out by personality and politics. There was no peer review of the Nicene Creed. Why should I believe that God had anything at all to do with that? I cannot disprove the existence of God. But I have heard him speak to me, and I'm talking about a specific God here, the Christian God of the Bible. And I've heard the devil speak to me too, and they both speak with the same voice. My voice. Once, it was easy to tell the two apart, because as a child, all of my actions fell easily into things I either should or should not be doing. But over time, the world became more complicated, and sometimes it was harder to tell them apart, and I began to wonder, what is more likely? That both these entities speak inside me with the same voice, or that both of these entities are just parts of myself. I've seen enough of humans to know that we are all conflicted, and we all experience that in different ways. Why should I believe that God has anything to do with that? God is no longer necessary. Our control of energy drives our understanding, and at this point in history, there are plausible explanations for everything that God once did. This does not end the conversation at all, but the way to these explanations was exactly the same as the way to the modern world that we all live in today. If you believe that humanity has erred in the modern world, then you must desire to go back to a simpler time. This is reasonable enough, but how far back must you go? Was it wrong to discover how to use oil, or how to use fire, or how to use the wheel? In the Bible, there are so many miracles, so much magic, and we are taught that God takes a personal interest in the fall of every sparrow, and the grandeur of this takes us on a journey of wondrous speculation. In the world I see, there are no miracles, no magic. I see the righteous taken advantage of by people who claim to be their shepherds, and they claim we should all obey because either we simply do not understand the plan or that the adversary is affecting the way we view it and acting against the plan. No. If God is so good and so great, why does evil or error exist? For me, the problem of evil is the final nail in the cross. The basic response to the problem of evil is that the adversary acts against the divine plan. But the adversary is always a subordinate of God gone bad. If God is so good and so great, then why did the adversary ever rebel? Zoroastrianism bolstered this first line of defense against the problem of evil by making the adversary more and more powerful over time. The next response is that God also wanted to respect the free choice of the adversary and all of creation. Okay, so why did God not make a better plan in which the adversary never had cause to rebel in the first place? The answer is a little bit more complex now. God cannot create a universe which contains no evil at all, so he creates the evil to serve the greatest benefit in the universe. So even the actions of the adversary in creating evil in the world are instrumental in producing the best of all possible worlds that God has in mind. But wait, our idea of God is that he is so good and so great that nothing is beyond him, literally nothing. Now we get into the weeds about what is and is not logically possible. Does God have limits on his power, or did he voluntarily constrain himself to protect free will? Maybe he could remake the universe so that the adversary doesn't rebel, but he won't out of respect for his creations. But how does that protect free will? In any world, we could say that we are in the best possible world God could have created, given the starting conditions and the voluntary constraints he placed upon himself before he started. And so what is best can now be defined from that statement alone. But if God is so good and so great, why do this just once? Wouldn't he do it a bunch of times, or maybe even all of them? But maybe that's going too far. Maybe it's enough to say that in this one world we know, evil is divinely designed to create the best world over all. So evil is good then? There's no end to these paradoxes, and there are many other explanations for all of God's greatness, but you cannot escape the fact that this divine plan is not building a pure belief in God. It's a terrible plan. In 2,000 years, no religion has gained a majority of human converts. Why not? If God is so good and so great, and this truly is the best of all possible worlds. If it isn't clear by now, I want to bracket all monotheistic gods together. They are all cut from the same cloth. I reject the idea that the Judeo-Christian tradition is distinct from the Islamic tradition or the Zoroastrian tradition. It's all surrender in the name of dogma to me. It's often said that the problem with Islam is that the theological is inextricably linked to the political, which is a different, albeit related, topic. But this is a distinction with a limited difference in my mind. The active project of all monotheism, now and forever, is to expand its political influence. Islam is the next stage of this tradition, precisely because it has accepted that to maintain influence in a complex world, a simple creed must restrain human decisions more and more as time goes on. And in this, Islam has discovered the solution to the problem of evil. The classical philosophical idea of God is all-present, all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good. Omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. This we can call an O4 deity. The Islamic solution to the problem of evil is to say, okay, my God is not in fact an O4 deity and cannot dispense with all incidental evil in the world, but my God is real and much more powerful than you, so you'd better listen. And this is why atheists speak of space wizards. And although I understand why it rubs believers the wrong way, it is an appropriate term because the only way you can interpret a God which relies on a millennia-old book to maintain a relationship with its flock is as a supremely powerful being in space and time. And such a God cannot be an O4 deity because it lacks the potence to make its perfect word known, it lacks the science to make the message intuitive across all times, it lacks the presence to make its word universal, and it clearly lacks the benevolence to maintain a consistent communication from biblical times to the present. And this is why God needs to come back. Because at this point in history, yes, you can philosophically formulate an O4 personal God if you are okay with a few linguistic paradoxes. But you must accept that there is only one possible thing that can create the universal system God requires. God must light up the sky and speak one clear message into the minds of every human, which can be simultaneously comprehended and demonstrably experienced. Everyone needs to see it, understand it, and show on the outside that they experienced it. A temporary effect will do, not like a tattoo, although thinking about it, a tattoo would be a nice reminder, more tangible than a rainbow certainly. Kind of like branding. Nothing less than this will convince a majority of God's existence, period. But wait, you might say, this would go against free will. No. Firstly, true free will was lost when God first created our best of all possible worlds. Second, perceived free will would be maintained. I guarantee you there would still be some atheists after this O4 event happened. And third, evil is already good when it applies to God's actions. Don't sweat the morality, you can't understand it, and neither can I. The O4 God is not of the material world. There is no way to define it save by faith alone, and in an ever more complex world, faith is clearly losing. Side note to religious fundamentalists, you could get to work now on a custom-made genetic virus which would insert a hard-coded belief in a specific deity into the genome of all humans and also dampen the mythologizing instinct to find another replacement one. But if such a thing were possible, it would basically prove that your God does not actually exist. Have fun! Now, I really do believe that much good has been done in the world by religion and continues even to this day, in spite of some slip-ups. But it has been done directly in the minds of the faithful. Religion does not give value to anything you personally may believe about purpose. Without it, what is important to you would remain important, and for exactly the same reasons it has always been important. That seems like an extraordinary thing to say, especially as a non-believer presuming to question the religion of others. And at this point, I can only fall back on anecdotes to get my feelings across succinctly. My mother is a Methodist Christian and very active in her church community, and I can say they are some of the nicest, kindest, most decent-hearted people I have ever met. They are a little judgmental sometimes, but it's all based on your life experience, eh? And they actively try not to be. So what more can you ask for? What makes these people so good? Especially when you compare that to some of the other things that are done in the name of the same religion, Christianity, around the globe. And other religions too, of course. Are they reading a different book? No. Different versions maybe, but surely the message is the same, right? I mean, that's the point. God's perfect word maintained in Scripture, right? Or else they would literally be a different religion, right? And that would mean that there is even less worldwide consensus over what God really wants, right? The best of us is found when we feel like we are acting meaningfully, meaning we can understand what we can change and what we cannot, and we act appropriately to make a difference. And it is not only the Christians who have called this serenity. When I mentioned starting to meditate to my mother and some of the struggles that I was facing, she made a direct comparison. It's just like praying, she said. It can be boring, but you just do it. And she's exactly right. On some important level, we are doing precisely the same thing. Is it providence or process? It doesn't matter. The question is wrong. Why is meditation associated with feelings of being more in control of your life? Why does a strong religious faith give a solid core for people to build themselves around? Why does prayer, ostensibly doing nothing, make all the difference to some people? If there is a simple truth beyond complexity, then we cannot internalize it. The only meaning that we ever have is the one we find within ourselves, not one that is given by anyone else. You are alone. Not a single other human shares the same religion as you. And yet, as a human, I do feel slightly uncomfortable making this case. The most compelling reason I've ever been given to simply let this go is the comfort that religion gives to the peaceful and decent people who follow it. Truly, there is no reason to needlessly inflict distress on others, and despite what I think, religion cannot be dismantled without emotional damage to the flock. For any who are truly faithful, the loss of any part of that faith will incur trauma. But despite the obvious harm that could come from it, I nonetheless believe that to make this case is ethical, because climate change, sectarian violence, political in-group mentality, and sex negativity are all bound up in this. I should perhaps give some specific examples, but why bother? It's all of them. And this goes around the world. I have a special bone to pick with monotheism today, but tribalism transcends monotheism. There is no one ready to pick up the pieces if we fail. Original sin is mere humanity. It is our cross to bear and our victory to claim. No religion can resolve the global problems we face. Their scope is just too small. The lovely people at my mum's congregation are forming a bulwark of monolithic Christianity which allows the fringe to function. It's not fair to them, just as it's not fair to the Muslims, the Jews, the Buddhists, the Hindus, etc., etc., etc. But none of them can do anything about it because they are all too married to their monolithic identity. And all of the new ways of thinking after religion, they're all lining up to make exactly the same mistake. If God is so good and so great, then I am not impressed. And in my mind at least, you don't need to give up any of the lessons religion has taught you, because in fact, through sincere reflection, you have taught those lessons to yourself. There is one more issue I would like to discuss. It is a specific case from Christianity, but these kinds of arguments are found across all prophetic creeds. Some people claim there is irrefutable evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I have listened to people of faith explain this case, although I am not a biblical scholar myself, but as I understand the interpretations of the text that exist, this is simply not true. The most you can claim is that one fine day, around 33 AD, a man was crucified and upon being taken down he was declared dead. His body was placed in a cave with a large rock filling the cave mouth, too big to be pulled out by a single person from the outside. 3 days later, some women discovered that the stone had moved and that man arrived among his followers, alive again. The texts are not conclusive, but if we grant all of this, then I say, sure, dude was in a coma. They mistakenly declared him dead, and he woke up after a couple of days, but his will was strong enough, so he was able, by bracing his back against the cave wall and using all of his fading strength, to push the rock aside just enough to escape. Again, this does not disprove the resurrection, but people naturally awaken from comas, so to me it is the more plausible explanation. Even if you claim that there are primary sources claiming the resurrection of Jesus, which I do not believe there are, then the resurrection of Christ is at best a medical case study. And there are plenty of historical figures who have been raised to spiritual glory after their death. The first followers of the Buddha were clear that their teacher was a mortal man. The first descriptions of him as somehow divine came a century or so later. Christ is in no way unique. Whatever the truth of this matter, it is absolutely clear that humanity is in its adolescence, a challenging time for children to be sure, when we still want our parents to be able to show us the way, but we realize that our lives and priorities are slowly drifting apart. If God does exist, it has become clear enough over the last few centuries that God does not want their presence to be felt, and maybe you might consider that the strongest and most compassionate thing that any parent ever does in an ever-changing world is to allow their children the space to decide for themselves what is ethical.